God bless America. Hello, everybody. I am the Talk Radio Protege. This is the Protege program. Thank you so much for joining me. I think I owe everyone an apology for yesterday. I fully intended on Tuesday to record and publish a video where we read the Roe v. Wade decision from back in the 70s, where we talked about some of the criticisms and analysis from people that have spent more time researching Roe v. Wade than I have, and I didn't deliver that. And I do apologize. Just in case you're wondering, the short version of the story is there were 4 things that I wanted to do yesterday, and I picked the other 3. And that's what I had time to do yesterday. Yesterday/Tuesday night, because Tuesday night could have been spent on the Roe v. Wade video. Instead, I chose to do one of the other 3 things. 2 of those things I don't regret prioritizing over the Roe v. Wade video. One of them, the thing that I ended up doing Tuesday night, I do regret. So I apologize for not providing that video for you guys. I should have come through on it. I can't promise that it won't happen again in the future, because in my defense, this is just a hobby at this point that I'm not getting paid for. I'm not saying that to e-bag. I'm not gonna bring up the fact that I'm not getting paid for this and then ask you guys to give me money. That I feel like that would be a very hypocritical thing to do. But anyhow, that's just to say, if I were getting paid for this, I probably wouldn't have prioritized something else over the Roe v. Wade video. It is coming. I am going to continue working on it, and I think I can have it out to you on Saturday. I think. I'm not going to promise that, but that's my goal at this point. So with that aside, let's get on to the news of the day. There are 3 items that I want to talk about, and I think I'm just going to spend a few minutes on each item. First of all, it's been, I've read in different places that Trump is going to announce his Supreme Court pick to fill Kennedy's seat on Monday. And the short list has evolved into the short list. There were 6, and now there are 3. I believe it was as early as Tuesday that there were 6 people left. I've heard that the original list that I guess Trump is going to make all of his Supreme Court decisions from is something on the order of 25 persons long, and the short list was 6 persons long, and now the short list is 3 persons long. So we're just going to talk for a couple of moments about who those people are. And I wonder now, I just saw that John Roberts is credited as one of the writers for this column. I wonder if that's Justice John Roberts. President Trump has completed his interview process for Supreme Court candidates after speaking with 6 judges, with 3 finalists in particular leading the field. The president and his vetting team have moved quickly ahead of an expected announcement on Monday. Fox News is told that Trump has interviewed 6 candidates. The interviews comprised 7 conversations. Trump talked to 1 candidate twice. Multiple sources indicated Kavanaugh, Keithledge, and Barrett are currently the focus of attention. That would be Brett Kavanaugh, Raymond Keithledge, and Amy Coney Barrett. Now, if you've heard any analysis of these picks beforehand, you've probably heard varying things. I think I think conservative commentators are the biggest fans of Amy Barrett. I think the intellectual right, the intellectual conservatives are big fans of Brett Kavanaugh. The establishment is certainly big fans of Brett Kavanaugh, because Kavanaugh doesn't have a lot of a judicial history. He certainly doesn't have much controversial judicial history. There's a rumor, and I'm calling it a rumor because I haven't read the opinion myself, but I've heard multiple sources say that they have also heard this rumor, that Brett Kavanaugh authored the skeletal framework for the reasoning behind John Roberts' decision and opinion in the Obamacare lawsuit, where John Roberts famously flipped to the liberal side of the court and declared that the Obamacare mandate was a tax and therefore constitutional. So if that's the case, then that is a big red flag to me for Brett Kavanaugh. The most convincing arguments that I've heard for Amy Barrett is, number one, she's the favorite of these three picks by Ben Shapiro, I believe. And I think that Ben Shapiro, while he was a never Trumper in 2016, I think he's more of he would like to see a Ronald Reagan version of President Trump in the White House. And as long as President Trump is basically Ronald Reagan 2.0, he's going to root for President Trump. So if Ben Shapiro says that Amy Barrett is the best pick, Amy Barrett is probably the best pick of these three. Probably a pretty good pick. One other thing that is encouraging to me about this process is that the president had an additional phone call with Utah GOP Senator Mike Lee. Now, if you've been following this very closely, you'll know that Mike Lee was an early rumor to be on the short list. Now, obviously, he's not on the short list, but again, going back to an opinion of Ben Shapiro, Ben stated that he thought that the absolute best pick would have been Senator Mike Lee for the Supreme Court, because we know that Mike Lee is going to vote according to the Constitution on matters that the Supreme Court hears. I would tend to agree with that assessment. While it would be dangerous to leave another vacancy in the Senate, I'm not sure. Mike Lee's seat might be really safe. He's from Utah. Maybe it's a very safe seat. But anyhow, it's encouraging to me that the president is consulting with Mike Lee, given Mike Lee's reputation for being a constitutionalist. I have no doubt that Mike Lee made a strong recommendation to Trump to pick the constitutionalist candidate. Now, another advisor on who to pick for the Supreme Court, one of the top advisors, allegedly, for this process, has indicated that he wants Trump to pick Kavanaugh. And of course, that has all kinds of red flags. So I think that the short list is actually 2 people, not 3. Not sure where the advisement is coming to have Keithledge on the short list. Maybe it's just for the sake of suspense that Keithledge is on the list. But anyhow, let's move along. This is incredibly encouraging news to me. Putting it in the middle might seem like a strange place to put a piece like this, but it's just the order that I'm going to go in. The U.S. labor shortage is reaching a critical point. Now, why is it encouraging that the United States is facing a labor shortage? Because labor shortages are extremely good for workers. Labor shortages are extremely good for workers. Why is that? Let me paint you a picture. Let me give you an example. A worker, let's say Bob, works his job and he does well. Let's say that Bob is a hard worker and it works hard enough that his boss thinks that it would be profitable. It would remain profitable to give Bob a raise, but he just hasn't given Bob a raise because Bob hasn't asked for a raise. The company has guidelines on which it gives people automatic raises, and it has policies on which it will give people additional raises in addition to the automatics. Now, Bob also thinks that he's been a hard worker, and he thinks that he could get away with asking for a raise. So he goes into the boss's office and he says, "Hey boss, I want a raise." And the first thing that the boss says, and it's not out of animus towards Bob, it's not because the boss doesn't like Bob, it's just because the boss wants to see if Bob will just keep working for his current pay. Bob says, "Hey, I want a raise." The boss says, thanks but no thanks. Now, if Bob is if Bob is feeling lucky, then he says, here's my resignation, I'm out. In a labor surplus market, the boss says, see you later, Bob, and Bob loses his job. Because in a labor surplus market where there are more jobs, where there are more workers than jobs to fill, someone else will work Bob's job for what Bob is getting paid, or maybe less. So the boss just says, fine, you resign, I'll hire somebody else. In a labor shortage market where there are fewer workers than jobs to be filled, then the boss might have to spend a lot of resources to fill Bob's position, while he spends even more resources to bring on a new worker. Plus, Bob doesn't have to be trained to keep working his job, whereas he might have to train a new worker. He might have to invest a lot of resources to fill Bob's position, then hire someone to permanently fill Bob's position, then train someone to adequately fill Bob's position. And then he's out Bob, who is really good at his job. So he might, instead of saying, see you later, Bob, he might say, wait, hold on, Bob, I think we can give you a raise. That's why labor shortages are very good for workers. Much better than any labor union. I think labor unions are extremely overrated in how good they are for individual workers. But I've never been a member of a labor union, so maybe they are good for something. I certainly agree that there was a time when labor unions were fantastic and were doing a lot of good work for workers. But I think that time period has more or less gone by, and that labor unions are much less about the worker now than they used to be. Is a labor shortage good for businesses? This right here ought to make liberals do flips in the air and scream and shout hallelujah that the economy is growing so great that there's a labor shortage. Labor shortages are, at first glance, bad for businesses. Maybe at second glance too. I'm not a business expert, is why I'm saying at first glance. Because businesses have to spend more money on their workers in a labor shortage. Because in a labor shortage, people are hunting for people to fill jobs. Businesses are hunting for workers. So if a business finds a worker that's doing a job, they might say, hey, I'll pay you 25% more than you're being paid right now to do the job you're doing right now for me. And so the worker says, okay, that's great. And then he leaves his job and goes and gets his new job and gets paid more money. It's good for the worker, it's bad for the business, because the business is having to spend more money on his worker. It's reducing the profit margin. So liberals ought to be really excited about this. But of course, a labor shortage generally means that the economy is gangbusters already. Businesses are really, really well off, which is why we're experiencing a labor shortage. So at second glance, yeah, in the short term, it's bad for businesses that there's a labor shortage, but in the big picture, businesses are doing great anyways, due to the fact that there is contributing to the labor shortage because they're doing so great. Now let's move on to the final piece of news. This is an opportunity to have a conversation about a couple of different things. So the headline from the Washington Times is Facebook flags Declaration of Independence as hate speech. Now, Facebook didn't flag the entirety of the Declaration of Independence as hate speech. That's a little bit of an exaggeration there by the Times. What Facebook flagged as hate speech was an excerpt from the Declaration. The Liberty County Vindicator, a community newspaper between Houston and Beaumont, that's in Texas, had been posting the whole Declaration in small daily chunks for 9 days on its Facebook page in the run-up to 4th of July. But the 10th excerpt was not posted Monday as scheduled, and the paper said it received an automated notice saying this post goes against our standards on hate speech. So 9 out of 10 excerpts from the Declaration of Independence were not hate speech, but the 10th was. And when I show you the excerpt, you might understand why an algorithm would flag it for hate speech. Here's the offending passage. It was part of the document's Bill of Particulars against Britain's King George III. Quote, he has excited domestic insurrections against us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. And this video just got demonetized / put into a limited state because I said the phrase merciless Indian savages. Now, that you might understand why that would be flagged as hate speech. Savages, in the current year, is, especially when used in the context of Indians, considered to be a disparaging statement. If someone is savage, then they're not civilized, and if they're not civilized, then they're not, white. At least that's the way the left looks at it, because the left can't distinguish between two people of the same race. So but the reason that they're called savages and merciless is laid out immediately following the characterization as savages, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. This means that particular of the Indians, the merciless savage variety, would go into a community and exterminate them. It was an extermination. It was warfare of extermination. It was obliteration of these communities. I can tell you who else was savage, and you might actually remember this guy being savage. Who in the audience recognizes the name Ulysses S. Grant? You might remember him from your middle school history class, because to my recollection, Ulysses S. Grant got an entire section of Civil War history devoted just to the campaign that he waged from Louisiana to Georgia. It was called Total War, and you could word this paragraph of the Declaration of Independence in this way, talking about Abraham Lincoln. He has excited domestic insurrections amongst the South and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers, the North, the merciless Ulysses S. Grant savage, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all properties. You see, Ulysses S. Grant waged a total war campaign from Louisiana to Georgia and burned everything in his path. If I'm not mistaken, he also killed everyone wearing a Confederate uniform, no matter their age, sex, or condition. Ulysses was a merciless savage, so it's not racist to call someone a merciless savage. It's a characterization of their wartime strategy, particularly in the case of the Declaration of Independence, the way that some of the Indian tribes were waging war. So that's what happened when Facebook flagged the Declaration of Independence for hate speech. But something else, here's where the opportunity is. We can talk about algorithms. You can program an algorithm to pick out a word, like the N-word, and you can tell the algorithm, this sequence of letters is unacceptable, and you must remove this sequence of letters as soon as it is uploaded to the website. But then that sequence of letters might appear in a number of other instances. Just for the sake, I've already called Indians savages, so I probably shouldn't use any more things that YouTube might decide to ban this video for. But the N-word, all of those letters, with one letter changed, appears in another word that does not mean a black person. Chink. Some of you may have just got triggered, but chink means a weakness. It means a weakness specifically like a chink in armor, but it's also a derogatory word that's used to describe Far Eastern people of the Oriental variety. So a algorithm might see the word chink and not see the context. It sees the word chink and bans the post, when really somebody was talking about the armor that a medieval knight used to wear, and was talking about the weak points in the armor were identified by chinks between the plates. And the algorithm can't differentiate between a racial slur and the word used in a different context. The algorithm can't see context. That's why it's dangerous to automatically screen content with current age algorithms. If we can ever get an algorithm that can understand context, then we would be one step closer to being able to catch actually racist remarks. But then again, if we were able to get to an algorithm that distinguishes context, it's up to the subjective interpretation of the programmer what context is and is not racist. So there's still a problem. There's still going to be a bias, even in an algorithm, because the programmer is a human who will have biases. That's going to do it for this video. I hope that you guys enjoyed. Leave a like if you did. Let me know in the comments down below what your thoughts are. Hit subscribe and hit the bell for notifications so that you don't miss future videos. Again, the Roe v. Wade video is going to be coming down the pike. I hope that you guys will tune in for that when the time comes. Again, thank you for watching this video. I hope you'll come back and join me next time. Until then, good night and God bless.